So we're here today on May 6th, 2014 with Ed Fries and from Microsoft and various other ventures in post-Microsoft life. And Ed, welcome to the Computer History Museum.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Really glad to have you here today. Can you tell us a bit about your early years, where you grew up, where you went to school, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up outside Seattle, a town called Bellevue. My mom and dad both moved out from the East Coast to work for Boeing. So Bellevue is kind of the engineers' town at Boeing. So everything was Boeing back then. You know, it was the biggest employer, and so yeah, that's where I grew up.
Were your parents technically oriented, or
Yeah,
did
they were both technical. Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad is an electrical engineer, and my mom was a chemical engineer.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they met at Bucknell, and then both ended up getting hired by Boeing and moving out here. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So tell me how they influenced you then. Having two engineers as parents must have had some kind of influence.
You know, it gets worse actually, because my mom quit her job when she had the kids, and then when I was in 6th grade, she went back to school, back to University of Washington, and got a master's in computer science.
Wow.
And then went to work at DEC, a digital equipment corporation, as you know. So yeah, Dad was at Boeing and Mom was at DEC, and they had a huge influence. I mean, I don't know, just sitting around the table talking at dinner, it was always, I don't know, technical stuff. And Dad would bring home programmable calculators and stuff like that, which back then were hard to come by and expensive. I remember HP 95 calculator with a little mag tape that would go through it, and that was some of the first programming I did was on that, was writing simple calculator games.
Right. So I was going to ask you what your first computer was, but it sounds like it was a calculator.
Yeah, it really was a calculator. I had some other interesting things that maybe you have here at the museum. I had something called a cardiac.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, which is, for people who don't know, is a cardboard computer put out by Bell Labs.
Right.
And that was my first exposure to assembly language. Anyway, yeah, you look it up. I mean, there's no way to know what it is. How can you have a cardboard computer, right?
Yeah.
But it actually works quite well. My dad brought home a little KIT 6800 hex keypad, LED display, and I did some assembly programming on that when I was in junior high. Mom would bring home sometimes a printing terminal. Somebody was asking me about that in an interview the other day, what a printing terminal was. But
like a Silent 700 or something?
I don't remember
like that.
You know, what it was, but yeah, you know, it had the modem, the phone cradle, and then, you know, paper.
Yeah.
It's basically like an electric typewriter, except the computer controls it half the time and you control it the other half. So if you're playing something like a text adventure, it works really well. You know, you type what you want to do, and then it prints out the response.
Right.
So that kind of thing, those are some early memories. Yeah.
Did you have any hobbies or interests, like
other than computers?
Other than computers.
Yeah, sure. When I was a kid, boy, what were my hobbies? You know, I mean, I was a Cub Scout. My dad was into fishing and flying model airplanes. He would build control line airplanes and fly them. I just gave a speech at a conference called DICE, where I interviewed him for the talk, and I talked about flying control line airplanes. So
you interviewed your dad?
I did, yeah,
wow.
Which was a little scary.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you should watch that talk.
Okay.
You just look on, it's on YouTube. If you search for my name and DICE.
DICE. Okay.
Yeah, you'll find that talk. But you know, Dungeons and Dragons in junior high. But I was also into drama. I was in a bunch of musicals and stuff like that. Had a close group of friends who were really into playing cards.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so.
Did you enjoy school for the most part? Or?
Yeah, I guess I have pretty good memories of school. I mean, I went through, you know, I think like every kid does, you know, kind of trying to find your place in school and your group of friends. I was lucky to, by the time I got to high school, I made really good set of friends who are still friends with me today. In fact, we were just playing cards Saturday night, so we still get together and play. But yeah, I mean, in high school, I spent by high school, I got an Atari 800 and really fell in love with that machine, and that really, I wasn't sure what I was going to do until then, but once I found that machine, that really made clear I was going to spend my time with computers.
Really?
Yeah.
So that was it?
Yeah, that was it for me.
Interesting. What year would that have been?
So I graduated from high school in '82, so I think I got the 800 probably in 1980.
Okay.
Yeah, spent a lot of time with that machine.
So what kind of things did you do with it?
Well, you know, I started typing in games out of magazines. There were computer magazines like Creative Computing or Antic, and they would print big basic games, and I just sit there, type them in. I remember at one point I wrote a program to help me type in the programs, you know, where you'd hit a key and it would be a whole basic keyword kind of thing. So just to make it faster. Right. You know, at first I only had a tape drive, you know, cassette tape drive to save things on. Okay. And you know, that was very unreliable. Yeah. And so it was sort of a minor tragedy if you couldn't save something. But I think probably typing things in helped me kind of learn how programs are structured. And, so then I started making my own, first in BASIC, and then when that wasn't fast enough, I started to do assembly programming.
And then what were the kind of programs? Games mainly, or? Yeah,
typically I did games. Okay. I mean, some of the early games, if you ask my friends, some of them remember I did a game to play gin rummy called CompuFo. We would play against CompuFo. I did a little game where you could make robots, and the robots would battle each other. And so you'd program the robots in sort of a pseudo-assembly language, and then they would move around the screen and fight each other. And my friends made little robots, and anyway, that was a good time. Probably the first kind of semi-serious game I made was I did a copy of Space Wars in assembly language.
The classic MIT game from 1961.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had the sun and I had the ships, and I needed to do the gravity for the sun, and to do that I needed a square root routine, and that was tough to come by for 6502. And I found one in the library. I went to the library, which, you know, back then you had to like use a card catalog, right? But somehow I found a square root routine and in a magazine. And guess who wrote the square root routine article?
Bill Gates?
Woz.
Woz. Okay. Wow.
So anyway, so I used
Woz's 6502 is more Woz's style,
so I used Woz's square root routine, and so I made a little Space Wars, and I submitted it to Atari. They had this thing called the Atari Program Exchange where people could submit programs. Oh, yeah. It's funny, I found the...
Apex, wasn't it?
Right. Yeah. I found the rejection letter the other day when I was going through some stuff. Yeah. And I remember it, you know, in my mind I remember just like they turned it down, and I was sort of crushed, and I moved on to something else. And when I read it now, it basically said, hey, if you could, it's actually pretty cool, and if you could just fix these 3 things, we would we would take it, but I don't remember it that way. Yeah. I remember it as they didn't like it.
A crushing defeat. Yeah, well, that's a real keepsake now, given what you did after that. What do you remember most about this? Is really the peak of the personal computer era. Not necessarily the IBM PC, but Ataris and Amigas and Commodores and Apples and so on. Do you have any specific memories of that time, and what game development, for example, was like for people back then?
Yeah, well, so when I was in junior high, the TRS-80 came out, and that machine, I used to ride my bike down to Radio Shack and just play around with it in the store, and it was terrible. I mean, the keyboard had terrible bounce problems. You'd hit a letter and you'd get 3 letters, you know, half the time.
I remember that.
And it was just a terrible machine to work on. When I started high school, they just got the first Apple IIs in, and we had a set of maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 Apple IIs in the back of a classroom. And you know, me and a half dozen other kids just made that our home.
Yeah.
You know, we just moved in there. And we played a lot of games we weren't supposed to, but you know, of course, we did anyway. Choplifter and Wizardry and stuff like that. And we wrote programs too in BASIC and Pascal. A couple math teachers took it on themselves to do some basic programming classes. I remember one particular class where a teacher had us write a program out in BASIC just on paper, and then he typed them all in, and then he ran them one at a time in front of the class. So you never got to debug it, right? You just you had to write it and hope. And the challenge was to make a rocket and have the rocket blast off. Draw a rocket on the screen and then have it blast off. And it was made a memory just because it was so funny. They would, you know, draw crazy, or they take off and go sideways, or every possible bug you could imagine.
Right.
But that was fun.
So he didn't use it as an opportunity for debugging as a class. He just you only got one shot.
For this particular assignment, we got one shot. Yeah. So that was funny. But you know, at home I had my 800, and I started to work on other things. So after the Space War that I mentioned, I did a Frogger clone called Froggy, and that was really my true entry into the video game business.
Was that commercially successful, or did you put it out there for sale? Or?
Well, so I made it just like everything I was making, just because I enjoyed programming, and I wasn't sure what to program. So when I saw something in an arcade, it gave me something to emulate, right? So I decided to make a Frogger clone, and I built one in assembly language, and just gave it to some friends and didn't really think about it. And it made its way through multiple, you know, through bulletin boards. There's no internet back then, of course. So, but there were. Do you want me to talk about bulletin boards?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, please go ahead.
So bulletin board. There were little bulletin boards all over the country. They were just people with home computers that were set up with a modem that would answer if someone called in, and then they would put up this little bulletin board software, and you could do things. Primarily, you could exchange messages, but the biggest thing is you could upload and download software. So only one person typically could be connected to a bulletin board at a time.
Right.
And so, you know, you'd call and it would be busy, and eventually you'd get in, and then you'd have maybe 10 minutes or 20 minutes to do whatever you wanted. And so so my program ended up getting up on some bulletin boards, and then from there it went to other bulletin boards, and that's how things would just move around the country that way. I mean, long distance cost money back then. So, you know, typically you only called the bulletin boards in your local area. But anyway, somehow my game made its way down to California, and the guys who were starting a company called Romox, R-O-M-O-X, saw it. And I was a high school kid working at a pizza place, you know, programming when I had free time. And yeah, and they contacted me and wanted to publish the game.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was very exciting.
They?
Yeah, they did. So, well, first they had to change the game because they were afraid we were going to get sued because it looked exactly like Frogger.
Okay.
It's called Froggy. But I don't know. Apparently they weren't too worried about getting sued. Their idea was that we should give it a medieval theme. And so they wanted me to replace the cars with jousting knights, okay? And then the idea was that you were a prince who had been turned into a frog, and you were trying to get across to the princess, to kiss the princess and turn back into a prince.
I see.
So that's kind of, I guess, a nice twist on Frogger. But what it means is it's still a frog hopping across. I mean, and the road, instead of having cars, it just had jousting knights, but it still had, you know, still looked like a road. The frog hops across, and then the river was unchanged. I mean, it still had the crocodiles and stuff. And then when you get across, in Frogger, there's a fly that moves from spot to spot, and it's like a bonus if you jump on the fly.
Oh, okay.
But my game had a big pair of lips that would move. You jump on the lips, and it would kind of freak out, and then you turn into a little prince's head. So that game is called Princess and Frog.
Oh, okay.
So Froggy became Princess and Frog. And yeah, that was published by Romox.
Right. Did you receive any
I did
royalties?
I did receive royalties. I had a very you know, they showed up, they put a contract in front of me. I had no legal representation.
Yeah.
The contract was 5% royalty, no advance. It's about as bad a contract as you could put in front of somebody.
Oh,
but that's fine. I signed it and was happy. And and then after it sold, I started getting royalty checks, and they were not huge, but they were thousands of dollars, and that helped me go through college. So that was nice. So
that's great.
I went off. I graduated from high school in '82 and went to college. I went to a little school called New Mexico Tech, a little school in the middle of New Mexico, and that's where I finished that game. And then I did 2 more games for them. A game called Anteater, which is kind of like Dig Dug, and a game called Sea Chase, where you're a little submarine and you go around. And then I was working on a 4th game when the entire game industry melted down in 1984.
Right.
Which has been in the news lately with the whole ET thing.
Yeah, actually, since you bring it up, why don't you tell us a bit about that and what were some of the forces? There was 1 or 2 major companies involved, but
yeah, I mean, you know, I don't think it was my fault. I was just a little programmer in New Mexico doing a few games.
Right.
But I think there were a lot of people like me cranking games out. A lot of games were coming into the market, and I think the market just got really oversaturated. Too much product, and retailers started cutting prices and cut price, and pretty soon they were basically giving cartridges away. They had tons of stock, and and the flip side was all the game companies had just completely bet the farm on these games. I mean, Atari had put out, I guess with ET they made more cartridges than they had sold consoles, so they were, betting that that the cartridge would actually sell consoles. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's just a huge flood of content, as I understand it, in the market at that time, and everything went away. Just in a very short amount of time. And it was interesting. I mean, it was because a lot of people thought, it's over. Video games was a fad, like lots of other fads, like hula hoops or pet rocks, and now we'll move on to something else.
So it wasn't just Atari; it was the whole ecosystem.
Oh yeah,
going down the drain.
Tons of little companies, more so than the big guys even.
Really?
Yeah. That's
interesting because you hear about Atari, of course, I guess because of the spectacular amount of money they lost, but obviously there's a lot of other people involved. So, what did you study in college?
Computer science.
Okay.
Big surprise.
Okay. And any particular specialization, like compilers or architecture or programming
I had
languages?
classes and all those things.
Yeah.
New Mexico Tech had a good computer science program. It was one of the top 10 in the nation at the time. I was admitted to University of Washington. I was accepted to go there, but I didn't want to go there because they had huge classes and not enough equipment for the students and things like that. New Mexico Tech, small. They had a big DEC PDP, a DEC 20. A DEC 20. They had a VAC 750. They had a bunch of equipment. So there was a lot of equipment to play with.
More opportunity for you.
Yeah.
There. Yeah.
And I was a pretty good programmer already, so computer science wasn't that hard for me, but I was totally untrained, I mean, if you went and looked at those old programs, you would just see, well, I still write 6502 assembly, it's not that different, but you'd see hundreds and hundreds of lines with no comments, for example. I remember one day going in, just when I first got there, looking over someone's shoulder in the computer lab as they were writing this game, and they were putting in all these comments, and I was thinking, wow, what a waste of time. Just typing in giant comments. But yeah, no, it was good. Good to get a formal computer science
What's
education.
Your position on commenting now? Is it a good idea or a waste of time?
I'm somewhere in between.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll write a comment and then I'll delete it because the code says exactly what the comment says. You know, and I think that's why did I put that comment in? But I try to comment things that aren't obvious.
Yeah.
Especially in assembly language, you can do a lot of tricks that are not obvious. So,
oh yeah. Yeah.
I'm, you know, probably my memory isn't as good as it was when I was 20. So it's good to leave myself a few hints when I go back and work on things later.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you graduated from college, and then what happened? Did you go right to Microsoft?
So a little before college, before I graduated from college. So after the game thing melted down, I had to get a job, and so I got a job working in the computer lab at school. So I was convinced them to make me a system administrator on the VAX.
Okay.
So I learned a lot about Unix 4.2 BSD Unix, and ran the system. Did a lot of early work with laser printers. We had a super early laser printer, and so got tech up and working this layout program you may know about, and a bunch of font stuff, and spent time chasing hackers. All the young computer science students are hackers trying to become root and take over the system, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then in the summer between my sophomore and junior year, I looked for a summer job in Seattle area, and so I sent resumes out to a bunch of people that I don't know how I found these different computer companies, but I just looked them up, and one little computer company called Starcom. I got a few interviews, and I went around and I interviewed like 3 or 4 places, and all of them asked me if I interviewed at Microsoft, and Microsoft was really small back then, first of all, and I was like, I didn't even think about Microsoft. They make BASIC, right? I mean, I don't know much more about them than that. But anyway, one little company hired me, a little company called Starcom, and it was a really small company. There was the CEO, his wife was a secretary, there was a sales guy, and then there was the programmer.
It's about as small as you can get.
Yeah, and they made kind of database management stuff, personal PC management software. And so their main product was something called files and folders. Let you organize data into files and folders. And so I went to work on that summer. And so I shared a desk with the programmer. So we had our 2 computers facing each other, and or back to back, I should say. And I worked on that. I worked and added a bunch of features to it, and just did a bunch of kind of databasey, software-y stuff. Back then, it was something a lot of people don't remember is back then, although there were a bunch of IBM PC clones, they weren't compatible. So like DEC had something called the Rainbow.
Right.
Somebody else I worked on something called an Apricot. I don't know, they were all these different machines, and they all technically ran DOS, but you had to make changes to the program to make it run on all these, so they weren't truly compatible.
Right.
But anyway, so I worked for them that summer, and then the next summer I sent out resumes again, and I sent one to Microsoft as well, because everybody had mentioned Microsoft, so I thought, why not? And they saw my resume and offered to fly me up to interview, which none of the other guys had done. You know, it was like March or something. And so, so I got to fly home and interview, which was great. Anyway, and I could talk more about the interview or whatever. It depends how much detail you want. But
yes, please do. And then coming into Microsoft, is that where you're?
Yeah, so I came in, I wasn't sure what to expect. Typical kind of Microsoft interview you kind of hear is an all-day thing where they go around and you just meet with one person after another, and they ask you to write code right there on the whiteboard and ask you tricky questions and stuff like that. And met with different people from different parts of the company. And my final interview, what I later learned was what's called the as-appropriate interview in Microsoft terminology, which is if it's as appropriate because you only see that person if it's appropriate. In other words, if they think they want to hire you, you don't know that when you're going through it. But so in Microsoft speak, I got to the as appropriate, who was a guy named Charles Simoni, and maybe you've heard of Charles, but
oh yes,
but he's a crazy Hungarian guy who's been super nice to me ever since then. A really great guy. I went to Kazakhstan and watched him blast off into space, for example.
Wow.
Anyway, so he was probably one of the most intense people I've ever met, by the way. Super intense, and he was my last guy, and he shows me just a bunch of probably must have been 80, 86 assembly language, and asked me what it did, and I had to go through and figure it out and explain it to him and stuff like that, which was tricky because I wasn't really an 80, 86 assembly programmer. But anyway, I convinced him apparently that I was was Microsoft material. So then they offered me a job that summer.
And
so I joined Microsoft that summer, and they put me on so I was a summer intern, by Microsoft terminology, and so they gave me sort of a summer intern job, which was they put me in charge of the tutorial system, the DOS tutorial system. Typically, a summer intern gets a job nobody else wants, and every Microsoft application back then, and so there were things like Multiplan and Multiword and I don't know, other ones I'm forgetting. Anyway, there were these DOS business applications that Microsoft did pre-Office. They all shipped with a tutorial. Okay, and this is pre-Windows. This is character-based days. Okay, right. Actually, the first version of Windows was being developed that summer, and I have stories about that too. But so there was a group whose job was just to create these tutorials. Okay, and they had a small set of programmers, and all the real programmers, guys like Ross Hunter and C.B. Layerly, all these guys, they were all working on the Windows version of the tools because they were getting ready for Windows 1.0 to launch. And so the intern got put in charge of maintaining the old tools. Okay? Right. So that was my job. So there were 3 programs. There was an editor, a thing called Pack, which compressed it, the thing that you made out of the editor, and then there was a runtime called Runt. Anyway, what was great, it was a great job for me because I'm a new guy there, and all the people who worked for me, or not who worked for me, who used this tool were right down the hall. They were all artists and writers, okay? And I worked for them, really. They would come to me and ask for features, and so I would make changes to it for what they wanted. I'm a pretty good programmer, like I said, so they would ask me for something, and I would give it to them pretty quickly. And so they started calling me Fast Eddie because my name was Eddie and I was fast. So so that became my nickname for a while. Fortunately, I got away from that. But one day, this one artist walks into my office. And her name is Janet Vogelzang, and she said she was doing a dentist office. Okay, and they would draw these things with just character art, right? Slashes and asterisks and things like that. And they were very good at them, so they'd have 3D perspective and a desk like and all that stuff. ASCII art, exactly. Right. She said she wanted to have a little tank in the corner where fish swam back and forth like you see at a dentist office. And could I add this animation capability? And I'm like, hey, I did games, I can do animation. So sure, no problem. So I add this animation feature, give it to her later that day. But it gave me an idea. I said, if you give me more fish, like if you make some bigger fish for me out of ASCII art, I have this other program I want to make. And so she did. She gave me a bunch of ASCII fish, and I wrote this game that made fish swim back and forth on the screen. Okay, and it's a Microsoft Fishorama. It had the Microsoft logo, and then the screen would blank, and then fish would go back and forth, and there was sort of waving grass on the bottom, which was made out of parentheses. So I just made it after work that night as just for fun. Gave it to Janet and a few more people, and after a while, as I'm going home at night, I started to see it running on more and more machines around the office. And so this fish program spread. And I don't know if it was the first screensaver, but it was certainly a very, very early screensaver. It was not my intent to make a screensaver. But anyway, I made this fish thing, which caused a whole nother, there's a whole fish thread that then goes through kind of the next 5 or 10 years of my life. But anyway, so then I wasn't just Fast Eddie, but I was also the fish guy. So people started bringing me fish stuff and fish, you know how it is with people think you collect things, more and more people start bringing it, so pretty soon my office is full of like fish crap that everyone has gotten on vacation somewhere. They see a fish, oh, Ed would like that, and they get it and bring it to me. So anyway, that's some of the stuff that started that summer.
Well, that's great. And since you brought it up, tell us a bit about Windows 1.0 and the steps leading up to that.
Okay, I'll tell you a couple. So I wasn't working directly on Windows 1.0.
Right.
I knew it was a troubled project. Sometimes I would go and CB Larrelly was a guy who, he was one of those guys who would just rant. And I learned this pretty early. And so I would go into his office maybe Friday afternoon and I just, I learned I only had to say a few words,
To trigger him?
Yeah, to trigger him, exactly. And then he would just go off and about how screwed up things were and blah, blah, blah. And this is pre-IPO Microsoft, by the way. So, I would hear about how low the pay was and how hard people worked and how unhappy they were. And, and in Windows, he would go off on all these rants, about how screwed up Windows was and blah, 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 blah. And then one week, for some reason, all the real programmers, the non-interns, were busy or gone or something. Maybe they were on vacation. And so they needed someone to go to a Windows status meeting. And so they sent me. I was the only, everyone else had already gone or couldn't go. So it got down to the intern. So they send me. My job is just to sit in this meeting and watch. And it's a status meeting, weekly status meeting on how Windows is doing. Okay. By then, Ballmer has fired the head of Windows and is running it himself. And it's a very screwed up project. It's missed its deadlines. Anyway, so I'm just a little kid sitting in the back watching this meeting, and Ballmer's up in front of this big whiteboard. And there's a chart on the whiteboard, and the chart is the bug count by week. Okay? And then there's like a solid line for the weeks that have passed so far, and then a dotted line projecting forward time. Okay, and the solid line looks maybe like this, and the dotted line looks like this. Right? You've seen charts, so it's like and then ship date. Right. Total fantasy. Yeah. No way. And he's up there and he's being rah-rah and he's talking about how we're gonna do this, and we can make these, we can make the date. And I'm just looking around and I just see these programmers, and they just look like dogs who've been beaten over and over again until they just lay there and just take whatever they. That's the look I saw in the eyes of the guys around the room. It's like Ballmer could say whatever he wants. These guys are just like exhausted, obviously giving everything they can, and this is the projection, not this. So anyway, so that made an impression on me. In the end, what happened was Ballmer came up with this clever marketing thing where there's no way they were going to make the final date, so they put out what they called the preview edition. Preview edition? There's some word like that. And if you guys should have a copy of this somewhere in your museum. But they put these out, and it was what we would call beta today. But by putting out this preview edition of Windows, he could claim that he met that date that they were trying to make, even though it wasn't really close to being done. And Windows 1.0 was pretty useless to begin with. I mean, it didn't have overlapping windows, for example. It had a tiled Windows system.
Wasn't 3.1 sort of the first really decent Windows? Something like that?
I'll talk about Windows 2. Windows 2 was the...
Do you want to tell us
either Windows 2 or Windows 95. But Between 2 and 95, yeah, maybe. Probably Windows 95 was the first Windows you could actually use. But so anyway,
okay.
Let's just finish up. So so I left Microsoft. I finished my internship. I go back to school for my senior year.
Right.
I do my senior year. I have a standing offer to come back and join Microsoft. They liked the job that I did, and they wanted me to come back and work for them.
Great.
But it wasn't clear what project I would work on.
Mm-hmm.
A guy named Jeff Harbers called me, who I didn't know, and said, but he was in charge of the applications group, Microsoft Desktop Applications Group, he told me that he couldn't decide which project I was going to go on. Either I was going to go on an old project or a new project. And I said, well, the new project sounds nice. This is all I knew, old or new. And then he called me back and said he decided to put me on the old project. But he wouldn't tell me what the old project was. I was like, okay. But I hadn't committed to taking that job yet. I sent out a bunch of resumes, got a lot of rejection letters, including one from Lotus, which would later be funny. But I interviewed at Cray. I interviewed at HP. I interviewed with a Unix consulting company out of Chicago. I don't remember what they're called. Anyway, the Cray job turned out to be a test job, which I didn't want. But HP and the Unix company offered me jobs. So I had 3 job offers to choose between that were all roughly equivalent. And it was a tough choice. I mean, you got to remember, I was definitely been CB layerized in the sense that I had heard all this bad stuff about Microsoft. But I had had a good experience there. And I wasn't sure what project I'd be on, the old project or the new project or whatever. Also, it seemed kind of like for me, I went to New Mexico kind of to get away, as a chance to and so going back to my hometown seemed like a little bit of a cop-out. But in the end, I decided to take the Microsoft job. Okay. And so I joined full-time in June of '86.
Okay.
And when I walked in, it was almost like going to a completely different company. In the time that I had been gone, which had only been less than a year, the company had gone public. And so everybody was walking around with big smiles on their face. I couldn't believe how different the attitude was than pre-IPO.
Yeah.
All the old programmers seemed like they were whistling to themselves. But also the company had completed the first part of its corporate headquarters, moved into the first 4 buildings, 4 X-shaped buildings around Lakeville, instead of being in kind of rented office space somewhere. And so it was really, really different. And it turned out that the new project that I did not get put on was something they were starting from scratch, which was called Microsoft Works. And the old project was to take the Macintosh version of Excel and turn it into a Windows application and take on Lotus 1-2-3. So the old project was actually way more interesting than the new project, and so I was really glad to be put on Excel. Yeah. And that was an awesome experience.
So ultimately you would work on Word and Excel, I think, right?
I would, yeah. So
can you tell us a bit about
Can I tell you about Excel for a while?
Yeah, yeah.
So probably the first time in my life when I was working with programmers who were better than me, first of all. There was a guy named Mark O'Brien who was the technical lead. At Microsoft, especially at that time, the technical lead is like the god of the program. Knows everything about it, and you do what they say. He was like the guy I had to talk to every day. He was the one who assigned me my tasks and stuff like that. I had a manager, a guy named Chris Peters, who's also an amazing guy, but Mark O'Brien was the technical guy I worked for. And there was another guy named Rick Powell, who was incredibly good programmer, and then John Devon, a bunch of other guys. There were 7 of us total working on this version of Excel. So relatively small team
Yeah.
by any modern standards. And we're taking on Lotus 123. You got to remember, Lotus is bigger than all of Microsoft at this time.
Right.
And 123 is their flagship product. So 7 guys, we're taking on that.
Can you tell us, just for the benefit of the audience, what 123 was, what it did?
Yeah, so both of these programs are, at their heart, they're a spreadsheet. But they also have some charting and some database capability as well.
Okay.
So I believe that's the 123 in Lotus 123 is the spreadsheet charting database.
Right.
So yeah, so I'm working with these guys, and it was incredibly challenging. I had a great boss, Chris Peters. He was just a really inspirational manager. Everybody on the team worked hard. Everybody on the team was talented. Great camaraderie. A real. Just to give you a sense, our team motto was "Recalc or Die." Okay, and Chris had these motorcycle leather jackets made up with a Harley logo that was replaced and said "Recalc or Die" on it. You know. That was like sort of the culture of that group. It's like, we're the best programmers. Maybe not at Microsoft, because the Windows guys always held themselves up, the systems guys, as the best. But okay, we'll ignore that. Certainly, of anyone else, we're the best, and maybe we could take them on too. All right, and so that was the attitude. There was a lot of attitude, and a lot of expectation. I remember, so as the new guy, I got assigned to lots of different tasks of porting parts of the Mac version over to Windows, and I had to create whole new things like the files, the file format, the XLS format I created with Mark's guidance, so that's just like, okay, give the new guy, make the file format, do this, do that, and and in making the file format, I had to understand pretty much how most of the program worked, because everything ends up getting translated into something that gets put out onto disk, right, and loaded back in again. Yeah. And so I'm like digging through complicated code that's like, dealing with formulas and reverse Polish notation, and I remember one day coming into Mark O'Brien's office, and so Mark was like this god to me. I mean, as this young kid with bright eyes coming in, here's this experienced programmer, but he's not just an experienced programmer. At night he plays lead guitar for a rock band called Green Ice. So he's this musician as well as being this incredible programmer. And he was a friendly guy, but he could be intimidating too. I mean, he was. I don't know. So anyway, yeah, so I come in and I'm like, I'm confused how this reverse Polish notation works and these nested formulas, and he looks at me, he's like, come on, Ed, it's just not that hard. And I walk out of there going, no, it's not that hard. Great. It's not that hard. Okay. But that was the kind of stuff I would get from Mark. And then I'd go back and I'd figure it out. Nothing's hard once you understand it, but
sure.
But anyway, so it was a real kind of trial by fire. Rick was almost the opposite. Rick was I don't know where Rick was from.
What's his
Rick
last name?
Powell.
Rick Powell. Okay.
He had kind of like a southern sort of accent a little bit, and he was a little slow in the way he would talk, and when he had free time, like when he was compiling, he used to like to play this game called Daleks. Do you know what Daleks is?
From
Daleks is
Doctor Who?
Yeah. But it's a super old game where you have robots and they move towards you. Every step you move, all the robots move directly towards you, even if it means they're going to crash into each other and blow each other up. It dates all the way back to printing terminals. About the simplest game you could play, and that was his game of choice. He would play this game for hours, and you'd say, like, Rick, what do you see in that game? And he'd be like, to win at Daleks, you got to think like a Dalek. That's what he would say. But the Daleks, all they do is move towards you. So thinking like a Dalek is not
Right. Not very hard.
Not very hard. But this was Rick's way.
Yeah.
You know, and he would handle incredibly complicated parts of the program, and he would make them seem easy. If he didn't like the code you wrote, you'd come in the next day and you'd find it rewritten. Because he wasn't confrontational. He was just do it.
Wow.
You know what I mean? He was like that. So anyway.
How do new features get introduced into Excel at that time? Was it from marketing, or did you guys come up with your own ideas? Or?
It's a really good question for the next version of Excel. Can I tell it? Can I?
Oh, sure. Yeah, yeah.
Can I tell a funny story about this version first?
Yeah,
that includes this set of characters, and then I'll answer that question.
Absolutely.
Because I have a good story for that, too.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So we're getting near the end of the first version of Excel for Windows. It was going to be called Excel 2.0, and it's going to launch with Windows 2.0. It was going to launch for whatever, September, November 1997. Right? No, 1987. I don't want to miss a decade. Sorry. Right. 1987. Okay. And it's all coming together. It's looking good. When you're working on a big, complicated program like this, the scariest thing is that you could find a bug at the last minute that could be, I mean, bugs go from really easy to really, really hard. Mm-hmm. And so when you're getting down and you're closing things off and you're fixing the last bugs, you just never know if somebody's going to find this really bad bug. So one day, one of our crazy testers submits a bug called sin dogs into our bug database. And it gets assigned to Mark O'Brien, and who's our lead programmer, technical lead. And the bug was, you run this macro, and the macro does all kinds of different crazy things. It makes charts, it makes spreadsheets, it closes them, it opens new ones, does all this stuff for about 10 minutes.
Wow. And
at the very end, a message box pops up, and it says, sin dogs. And then the machine hangs. Bug doesn't make any sense. Look through the code. The word sin dogs, no one's heard of it. It doesn't appear anywhere in the code. Mark's working on it. Mark's got it. If anyone can fix it, Mark can fix it. A couple days go by. You know, we're probably a few weeks from shipping. He's still working on this bug. He starts to, and some of us are done. I mean, some of us are just sitting around making test things and making little games in Excel, trying to find our own bugs. And so he starts to farm the bug out to some more of us to try to get more of us to work on it. But we can't reproduce it. We run the macro. It works fine. He's got the tester's machine in his office. It works on the tester's machine. He's like, try cutting down the macro, make it simpler. Anytime I change the macro at all, the bug goes away. And we tried it. We can't even reproduce the bug, much less change the macro. We're no help. A few more days go by. We're starting to, and we're working long days. We're working late at night. We're starting to like tiptoe around his office because he's in there. I've never seen him work this long in a bug. You know, 3 days, 4 days. 5 days I go by, and all of a sudden I see something in his office I've never seen before. And there's just a mass of wires coming out of this machine, you know. And so I whisper to Rick, you know, I'm like, what is that? And he says, it's an ice machine. I'm like, what's an ice machine? He says, in-circuit emulator. He can put it in, he can replace the CPU with that, something that goes out to another machine, and it'll record all the assembly instructions as they execute, and then he can basically go backwards through. Okay. Anyway, another day or so goes by, and he has the bug. It's nighttime. It's probably 10 o'clock at night, and we hear him yell. He's got the bug. And it's the Windows guy's fault. Okay. And here's the bug. So there was no protected memory back then.
Right.
And so memory was just in blocks that could be scattered together. Okay. So we'd allocate a piece of memory. The system would allocate a piece of memory. They just could be bumped up right across, right next to each other.
Right.
Okay. One of those memory blocks belonged to the chart. Okay. And the charting code was drawing a line, and that line was clipped to a rectangle. Okay. So you really only want the line to go from here to here. You put a clipping rectangle around it, but you draw the line really big, and you only get that little part. Okay. So there was a bug in the clipping code. So when that line got drawn, it didn't just draw in the little part where the memory bitmap was. It drew outside the memory bitmap. okay, across one memory block into the next memory block. That in this situation, because of just the randomness of how everything lined up, was a system memory block.
Oops.
And in that system memory block was the word Windows. Okay? And as that line went through memory, it flipping bits, it flipped a few bits in the word Windows to change it to be Syndogs. Okay? And so then the message box came up and it said Syndogs, which was a corrupted version of Windows from the system.
Wow.
So anyway, and we were pretty close to the Windows group back then because we were their main client. There was nobody else really writing Windows apps. And so we worked, I mean, to give you a sense, earlier I had been working on scrolling speed, trying to get the spreadsheet to scroll faster. And I got it as fast as I could until in my profiles, what was showing up, number one was redrawing the scroll bar. So I could draw the whole spreadsheet and scroll it, but all my time was being spent on the stupid scroll bar. So I sent mail to the Windows guys and said, hey, can I rewrite your stupid scroll bar code? And they said, sure. And so I checked into their project, rewrote the scroll bar so it would be fast. And then, so that's how close we worked. So anyway, so when we found that bug, Mark and some other people literally went to the programmer's apartment. First they checked, he wasn't working. 10 o'clock at night, he's not working? So they go to his apartment and get this guy out of his apartment to come back and fix this bug.
Wow.
We shipped on our original date. Windows was late, of course. So we ended up shipping with a runtime version of Windows, so that when Excel 2.0 shipped, it came with a version of Windows packaged around it, so it would boot into Windows just to run that one program, and then it would quit back out.
Interesting.
Anyway, so that's the Syndogs bug story. So you asked about features. So
yeah, and how they spring up, how they're implemented.
Okay, so after Excel 2, we go into Excel 3. Mark O'Brien leaves to go to Juilliard's, to go to music school. Rick Powell becomes technical lead, clearly the best programmer left on the team. And we grow from 7 people to 15 people to do the next version of Excel. At the beginning of a project, it was always, we built a schedule. And the schedule had a whole bunch of features. And the schedule was pretty detailed. This was Chris Peters' real magic, was running projects on time. He was a master of doing this, better than anyone in the company, probably before or since. And he insisted that we build out this schedule in a really, at that time, very detailed, probably the smallest task would be an hour kind of basis. Big, complicated spreadsheet. And we updated it every week. So every week, you knew as a programmer, you were expected to do at least 40 hours of work on the schedule. Well, by having the schedule and knowing exactly when our ship date is and working backwards from that, how much time we have, and how many programmers we have, we know how many little units of work we can do. And so then we fill those in. Okay, there's a group of people, started as one on Excel 2.0, was a guy named Ralph Hartnick, who's a program manager. And the program managers were responsible for feature design. Okay, they were not programmers, although some of them had a programming background, which was always incredibly annoying to us, because they would come tell us the feature and then they'd try to explain how they would implement it.
How to implement it, yeah.
And it was always like, make a big table. We would joke about this. It's like, what is a table anyway? It's like, just tell me what you want. I'll make it.
Yeah.
But anyway, Ralph was like this fiery Argentinian guy who one day the police came and took him away in handcuffs. And we're like, what was that? And it turned out he had just bought a new car and he was driving to work across one of the floating bridges we have in Seattle. And the police started to chase him because he was speeding. And he decided in his fancy new car he could escape. So he goes as fast as he can and actually manages to dodge this police car, and he pulls into an apartment complex near work, ditches his car and walks to work. And a few hours later the police find the car, look up the license plate, find out who owns it, and then go and arrest him. Which he ultimately didn't I actually got out of it because they couldn't prove that he was driving the car at the time. But anyway, so this gives you a sense of Ralph. But anyway, so the program managers would have a whole set of features that they wanted to do, some of which were great, some of which were ridiculous. Our job wasn't really to argue with them about features, but our job was to schedule them. So if we thought it was ridiculous, it'd probably take longer to do than something that we liked. Also, we needed a certain amount of time every version to redo parts of the program, internal parts that were getting kind of creaky. So there was always a certain amount of time that we would spend redoing core systems.
Right.
And then sometimes the programmers had their own ideas about what they wanted to do as features, and they would propose them. And if they could kind of negotiate with the program managers, they could get a feature in.
Okay.
Chris Peters, the head of our group, his title was development manager. He liked to work on some features on the side. A development manager technically isn't scheduled, but he liked to have some kind of stuff to do when he wasn't managing, you know. So, so for Excel 3, he came up with this feature called AutoSum. And the idea of AutoSum was you would push a button and it would insert a sum formula into the formula bar. Now, we all thought it was ridiculous, we being the programmers. It was like, that's it? I mean, we're all working on really hard, technical, complicated, databasey, spreadsheety things, and his feature is you push a button and it inserts text into the formula bar? Really? That's your feature? So we teased him about it, you know, but he didn't listen to us. He did his feature. And you know, when we get near the end of the project, the marketing people start to get involved, and they're figuring out how to market this thing. And they loved this feature. You could push this button, and it would insert text, a sum, you know, in the formula bar. And they were so excited about this that they put it on the front of the box, and they made a big deal about it, and they made sure it got talked about in all the reviews. And we were all like, oh my God, I can't believe this. But it ended up, you know, it just shows Chris is a smart guy. People like it. They're still there. People like AutoSum today.
Yeah.
It all started with Chris.
That's great. So you moved at some point onto Word, I think, after Excel.
I did.
Is that right?
I did.
Okay.
Can I tell another story? Or?
Yes, yes. About Excel or whatever you like. Yeah. Lost my mic.
Okay.
Too.
One more story. This is an important one. So I was and still am a bad golfer. Okay. A good friend of mine who's a good athlete started dragging me out hitting golf balls with him. He needed somebody to play with in high school.
Okay.
And we still play together today. And so when you're a programmer, especially back then, you have a lot of free time because you make changes and you compile. And for a big project, a compile would take about 10 minutes. And so that's why programmers all like know how to juggle, and we used to pick locks. I'm a pretty good lock pick and stuff like that, because we'd have these 10-minute chunks of nothing to do while we were waiting for the program to compile a link and be able to test it. So I thought, I'll bring my golf club, I'll bring a putter in to work and a little hole, and I'll practice my putting while I'm waiting. So I'm putting. One day I'm out in the hallway putting, and I think it was Rick Powell comes to me and he says, you know, what if you went all the way? I was like, what do you mean? It's like what if you went all the way around the building? I'm like, I don't know. I never thought of that before. It's, you know, probably 10 o'clock at night, something like that. And we were in these X-shaped buildings, so we'd have a long hall, and then kind of an angled wall, and an angled wall, and then a long hall coming back, angled wall, angled wall. So instead of going the short way to putt into the hole, what if we went the long way, all the way around? So we tried it. Hit the ball as hard as you can, flying down the hallway, bounding down the hallway. And if you hit it straight enough, you could get it to go all the way down the hall, bounce off the angled wall, and go around the corner. If you nicked something, it might go bouncing into someone's office, or it could even, in the middle part, bounce down the stairs. Okay. So we started playing at night, And this became something we called the swing around the wing.
Now, are you putting or are you
putting?
Okay.
Oh, you have to use a putter.
Yeah.
But you're using real golf balls, and you're hitting them pretty hard.
Yeah. How long are these always?
Long. I mean,
like 100 feet.
Couple hundred feet, I'd say.
Couple hundred.
Probably 100 feet, and then the middle, and then another 100 feet. So anyway, over a period of months, the game evolves. And starts to become more structured. More people start to show up and they want to play. I have to organize it. So I have to limit it to Friday night, 6 o'clock, and I have to start organizing tee times. And so people would contact me on Friday. They'd want to get a tee time for that night, and I would organize them into groups of 6 and then send them off starting at 6 o'clock. And I would have, 5, 6, 7 groups of 6. And they would go as a group, and once they were around the corner, then I could start the next group. The guys on the back hallway, they didn't like this so much, so they started interfering with our game. So they started to put stuff out at night to interfere. Management was super generous about this. I think they saw it as a good morale thing. They didn't mind that there were golf ball bumpy divots in the walls.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'd tangle with the security guys, but I had approval from above to do it. Charles Simone knew we did it, and it was okay with him. And ultimately, Bill and Steve even came and watched and stuff. So, anyway, it was this big thing that went on for years. There was a big database of scores, and there was a trophy. I got this idea. It's an old MIT idea where I just started with a single Gumby, okay, and that was the trophy called the Gumbopolis, okay, and the Gumby. Then if you won that week, you got the Gumby, and you had to add something to it and bring it back next week. So it got bigger, it got added to an actual trophy thing, and again, the lights got added to it, and then it got added, and ultimately it was like this huge thing, and with lights and stuff stuck all over it. Different teams from the company would win, and they would put their logos on it, and anyway. I have the top half of it at home still, but anyway, I mean, this went on for years, and as we moved to multiple buildings and stuff like that, and all sorts of stories. But there was an intern named Nate Osgood, and summer intern, he wouldn't play all summer long. And then finally on his last day, we're like, Nate, you gotta play. It's your last chance. He's like, okay, fine. So he stands on the tee box, that spot in the carpet, and he swings a putter back, and as hard as he can, he hits the ball, and it flies straight sideways into the wall. And it just like sticks in the wall, and then falls out, and it's the biggest divot we've ever seen before. We're all looking at that, and we're like, that will be the measure of all divots from here on. So that became the unit of measurement. It was known as the Osgood. So from then on, every time somebody left a dent, we'd be like, oh, that's about a quarter Osgood, or that's an eighth Osgood. So anyway, stuff like that.
That's great.
Anyway, you better ask me some real questions.
Well, that's a lot of fun. Let's talk about Word and how you transitioned from Excel to
Word. I'll try to do Word. I can do Word faster. So what happened was, ultimately Excel. We did multiple versions of Excel. Excel was very successful. Excel, really started to beat Lotus 1-2-3 in the marketplace. My boss got promoted. Chris Peters got promoted from development manager to business unit manager and moved over to run Word. Okay. And he immediately got in a fight with the development manager over there. They were working on 2 versions of Word at once. They had kind of the poor, beat down, bad part of the team working on the old version of Word. And then there was the best people on the team were rewriting Word from scratch, which is a thing programmers always think they want to do. Mm-hmm. Rewrite it from scratch, it's going to be better. In Excel, our theory, mostly from Chris Peters, was that's stupid. Yeah, you rewrite it from scratch. It looks clean at first, but then once you go and deal with all the special cases, it looks just as bad as the old stuff did. Mm-hmm. It was just a giant waste of time. So he gets in it's completely different philosophy. So he goes over, and we had a much better track record, frankly, than Word did on meeting our goals and doing well in the market. So he goes over and gets in a fight with a dev manager. He's his boss. Dev manager quits. See you later. So he has no dev manager. By this time, I'm tech lead on Excel. So I'm lead programmer. And so he comes to me and says, come be dev manager on Word. I really liked Chris, really respect him. And so I'm like, yeah, sure, how hard can it be? I was managing it. By then, Excel had about 60 people, and I was managing what's called a feature team. So I had a group of like 7 or 8 programmers working for me. Plus, I was technical lead for the whole project. And when you're technical lead and the project's that big, typically I would have a line of people waiting in front of my office. Wow. And they would just come in one at a time, and with their problem, and I would tell them, go look at this, go do this, go work on that. Here's the answer to your problem, go. Right. And they would just come one after another. Plus, I'm trying to do my own stuff. Yeah. But I was good at it by then. I could handle that. It was totally fine. Anyway, so I go over to run Word development, and it was a very different place than Excel. It had a different culture. Programmers were a little older. Some of them were married. I didn't know very many married Excel programmers. There were some women on the team, no Excel women programmers. Very different culture. Right. And it was a culture at war with itself, because there was this team that was in charge of maintaining the old version of Word, and there were the hotshots working on the new version of Word, basically looking down on these guys. Right. And when the dev manager quit, Chris said, I'm going to cancel this new version. It's stupid. All of you guys are going to go work on the old version. Okay. So these people are pissed because they have to go, not only do they have to throw away their work, they have to go work on the old code, which they think is gross, but they have to work for the people who they've been pissing on for months, who were like the lesser people who didn't get put on the new project. Right. So this is my first job as a big manager, is to deal with this. Yeah. And it was really a nightmare.
How did you get them to get
along? It was really a nightmare. I came in for probably about 2 months. I tried to run it. First, I tried to do things like the Excel way. We would get together and we'd have these group meetings, and in Excel we'd all talk about issues and blah blah blah. And in Word, I got everybody together in a room and nobody would talk. Like, they would just stare at me. Nobody would talk. It's like, okay, this is harder than it looked, Then I'm going around, and all these hotshot guys, and they were hotshot guys, they were really good. They're all threatening to quit. I don't like who I'm working for, I don't like what I'm working on, blah, blah, blah. And I'm spending all my time, with them, trying to convince them, no, stay, it's going to work, blah, 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 blah. Right. And finally one day, I'm driving home, and I just had this, epiphany, and this phrase came into my head, and the phrase was, if your job isn't fun, you're not doing it right, okay? And I'm just, my job sucks, and I realize it's my fault, I'm not doing it right. And I came in the next day, and I said to everybody, had a group meeting, and I said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make one version of Word. We're going to kick WordPerfect's ass. It's going to be an awesome program. And either if you want to be part of it, great. If you don't want to be part of that, leave now, because I don't want you on the team. And right. Probably half of the hotshot programmers left. Wow. And everything was great from then on. It was so great. Because the people who stayed were dedicated to the mission, and we hired new people who were great, and we had a very clear, focused goal, and we made that version of Word. The internal code name was T3. It came out as Word 6.
Can you tell us where Word came from? Like where?
Yeah.
In version 1, where does that come from?
So it's before my time. So I never really knew Word. I was, a manager on Word, and I did some programming on it. I was not like the technical lead, where like Excel, I really understood the internals. Word, right. There were parts I didn't venture into. But the story, as I understand it, Word started with Charles Simone. So Charles, when he was at Xerox PARC, worked on a graphical word processor.
Right, Bravo, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I believe at that time he worked with a guy named Richard Brody. But certainly when it came to Microsoft, Richard Brody is the one who implemented Charles' idea. So there's some conflict between these two about who created Word. You know, Richard would say, and Richard's a very smart guy, Richard would say he was the one who made Word. And it's true in the sense that he programmed it. But there's a thing called the piece table, which is the core way that Word keeps track of data. That really, my understanding comes from Charles and Charles' ideas. So anyway, that's the core of Word, is those two guys.
Right. So
Richard Brody is, and both these guys are incredible characters, by the way, and different. But I mean, Richard Brody ended up leaving the company. He goes on Sale of the Century, the TV show, and just demolishes all the people.
what is that show? What's their thing? Like,
I don't even remember. All I remember is Sale of the Century. He beat everybody all week long. You know, there'd be any random question, and he would know the end. Would be like T.S. Eliot. You know,
Right.
You know, none of the other contestants could keep up with him. He won everything you could win. Won the car, you know, Ford Probe, and then that was his car for years. And then he went off and pursued his dream to become a major league umpire.
Wow.
And he went and tried really hard to become a major league umpire, and he just couldn't. He couldn't meet the. He did minor league, he did college, but major league umpires turns out have to be in really good shape apparently.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
You know, and like he couldn't run a fast enough
40
40 or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and then he wrote a couple self-help books, and then he became a professional poker player. That's what he's been doing recently. It's the Quiet Lion, Richard Brody.
Oh. Interesting.
And Charles, more stories about Charles. I mean, Charles is the only two-time space tourist, the only person who's been into space twice as a tourist.
Right.
But anyway, so these are like the guys I'm working with. But anyway,
He's a neat guy, Charles.
yeah, he is.
Like him. Let's see. Okay, so how do you transition from the Office group to the Xbox?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
So, can I do one more word story?
Yeah,
Do you have
do.
time?
This is gold. We love it.
Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So we're getting near the end of T3, the first version of Word that I managed. What would be known as Word 6. And we're missing our goals. I'm new to managing this team, but things are certainly better than the old days. But we're in the same situation where we're drawing that bug line, you know? And on Excel, we would meet our line. People would they'd stay late, they'd work hard, meet. On Word, every week, 10% off, 10% off. And I tried everything I could think of. I tried, being really nice to people and helpful. I tried being really mean to people and nasty. I tried everything I could think of. And every week, we're missing by 10%.
Is this a cumulative
It's somewhat
situation?
cumulative. Yeah, if I don't solve it pretty quickly, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
And finally, as a final act of desperation, when all the ideas I had failed, I actually asked the team. Like,
what does
if
it
they
take?
had any ideas
What does it take to motivate you
about
people?
how we could do it?
Right.
And pretty quickly, through having a group conversation about it, we settled on this idea, which was called Workaholic Wednesdays. Okay, and the theory behind Workaholic Wednesday was one day a week, we would all work late, really late, as late as we had to until we met our goal. Okay. The rest of the day, it was like crunch, but put into a single day. Because most of these people had families, and they needed to be home. But if there was one day a week that they could dedicate, this is what I learned from asking them, then they could just let their family know, I'm not going to be home Wednesday night. So we did Workaholic Wednesday. So Wednesday, I'd bring in dinner at 6. I'd bring in a snack at 9, another snack at midnight. And we were often there till 2, 3, 4 in the morning.
Wow.
Working very, very late. And we would leave when we met our goal. Okay? So when we got that extra 10%, we were done. We would leave. Everybody knew what the bug count was that we had to meet. And once we got our count to there,
right. So there was no expectation they would stay late on the other days.
Right.
Typically.
Right.
It was the one day allotted for
just the one day.
Psycho
Workaholic
work.
Wednesday was psycho work day.
Yeah.
But if you can get ahead on your bugs other days, maybe we'll get out a little earlier.
Yeah.
On Wednesday.
True.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it had a nice effect in that sense. And we started to meet our goals every week, which was good. It was brutal on Wednesdays. It was definitely brutal. The bad thing was the testers started to stay later. And every time a tester entered a new bug, we were one step farther behind. And so I made the testers didn't work for me. They were a separate group. So I couldn't control them. I could only sort of influence them. So I made a rule. I said, I don't want to see any new bugs on Wednesdays after 9 o'clock. If a bug comes in after 9 o'clock, something bad is going to happen to the tester who enters that bug. I'm not saying what it is, but I would not want to be that tester who enters that bug. So I put this out. So of course some snot-nosed tester, decides to challenge my rule and enters a bug at like 9:05 on Wednesday. What he doesn't know is that I've gone around and I've given cans of silly string to every programmer, 60 programmers, okay, cans of silly string. So everybody goes down to his office and just fills the office with silly string. I mean, covers the tester covers the entire office, and it was a thing of beauty. It was exactly what I hoped for. But the problem was, people were a little crazy on Wednesdays. They didn't stop with just that one office. Then they spread out in the hall, and they started to do and they did the whole test wing. And then they went up and they did all the development wing. And there was silly string across 2 whole wings of this building. Everything was trashed. We had a great time, but everything was. People just went wild. I mean, they went crazy.
So you guys have fun at Microsoft.
Yeah.
Occasionally, anyway.
I tried to have fun when I was there. So yeah. So about 2 a.m. or so, the cleaning crew would show up.
Right.
The janitorial service, and they looked at our halls, and they refused to even come into our hall. So I had to hire an outside cleaning crew to come in and clean up.
A SWAT team.
I did. I had to pay for an outside cleaning company to come in and clean up all the silly string, so that then our Microsoft cleaning crew would do their job. But it was worth it. It was totally worth it. And in the end, we met our goals, and we shipped the product on time, and it was all a happy story. So
yeah.
That's a silly string story. So anyway, so I was on Excel for 5 years, roughly. I was on Word for 5 years, roughly.
Okay.
At the end of that time, my boss had moved on. Chris Peters had moved on and had become a vice president working on some other stuff. I had a new boss, a little bit rougher relationship between him and me. And I was approached at that time, and my managers basically said, hey, you've been a development manager for 5 years. Next step up would be for you to be a business unit manager, like Chris had done. Maybe you'd like to do that. And maybe I would. Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I don't know anything about business, but okay. So they sent me down to California to look at the PowerPoint team, which I didn't really like. I looked at some TV initiative stuff that was going on in the company, interactive TV stuff. But the thing about me is, I had originally written those games like we talked about, but I played video games. That was what I did when I wasn't at work. I mean, I loved video games and played them all the time. That was my hobby away from work.
Oh, okay.
So I wasn't writing games at that time, but I was definitely playing them. So I got to think about Microsoft's games group. And I happened to run into somebody at an airport who worked in that group, and I asked him about it, and he said, oh yeah, our boss just left. We actually need a new business unit manager. It was great. So I wrote an email to Patty Stonecipher, who was the head of that group, and said, hey, I really want to do this job, and I think I'm the right guy for it, and blah, blah, blah. Interviewed with her. She was willing to have me have the job. But then my management freaked out about it, and multiple vice presidents called me into their offices and told me I was committing career suicide. They told me, why would you leave office, one of the most important parts of the company, to go work on something nobody cares about?
Interesting.
And but I had been at the company long enough and had enough success and enough clout that I could commit career suicide if I wanted, and you know, I could basically do what I wanted. And so I said, no, you know, put my foot down. This is really the job I want. This is what I want to do. And finally, they just kind of rolled their eyes and gave in and said, fine, go do your game thing. You know, and I went over to this new group.
Not exactly a ringing endorsement.
No, it definitely was not. No, I had to fight for this job.
Was the project itself viewed as kind of an orphan within Microsoft?
Oh, very much so, yeah. It was in a little group called the Kids and Games Group.
Really, literally the Kids and Games Group?
Kids and Games Group was what it was called at that time. There was a group doing stuff for kids and a group doing stuff for games. And they were doing Flight Simulator, and but you know, I had met with the team over there, and they had some interesting new projects in development. One of which was a game with a little company in Texas called Ensemble Studios, and they were working on something called Age of Empires.
Oh yeah.
And I was a big, you know, Dune 2 Command and Conquer fan, and so I looked at this, and I was pretty excited about that and some of the other stuff that they were doing. There were some real game industry people over there, people like Stuart Mulder, who came from Sierra, and but just a whole bunch of people. So anyway, so I went over there, and it was nice. Almost from the very beginning, it was nice because, well, in some ways it was nice, in some ways it was challenging. It was nice in the sense that nobody really cared about what I was doing. It was challenging because I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, and I had a problem where my bosses kept quitting. So I originally worked for someone named Charlotte Guyman, and 3 months in, she quit. And then I was working for a vice president, and then they quit. And then, so technically...
Is that Jay Allard or Seamus Blackley? Or
no, we're not into it.
That's way in the future?
Yeah, way in the future.
Okay.
Neither vice presidents till much later, but anyway.
Okay.
So, no, these are people you wouldn't know, but they were internal Microsoft people. And then they quit, and then, so now all of a sudden I'm reporting to this senior vice president who's one of the people who tried to talk me out of taking the job in the first place, you know. And I have this, you know, P&L review meeting. I'm not even sure what a P&L is at that point, you know. And he's, you know, going over my profit and loss statement, and he's jumping from line to line on the spreadsheet, and I'm just trying to keep up with him. And you know, he's like, how come your revenue's growing by 6%, but you're growing your marketing spend by 9%? And I don't know. I mean, like, I inherited half this stuff, you know. The other half I don't understand. So it was tough at the start from that sense.
Right.
And yeah, and I didn't have any real mentorship. I mean, especially after Charlotte left, and people would come into my office like they were working on this F1 game, racing game, Formula 1 racing game, and this guy walks into my office and says, you know, we need $1 million to sign the F1 license. I'm like, okay, I'll get back to you on that. And I go and talk to Charlotte, and I'm like, somebody just asked me for $1 million. What do I do? She's like, well, you know, it's up to you. It's your group. I mean, you know, here at this level you need approval from me. At this level you need approval from here. But generally, just do what you think is right. It's like, okay, I'm going to go do what I think is right, and that's basically how I ran the group for the next, you know, bunch of years. So probably 4 more years, we just grew our PC gaming group, grew it up, doing more and more games. Age of Empires was a huge success for us, brought in a lot of money. Flight Simulator was also very profitable for us. allowed us to go and buy multiple other companies. We started to expand. We got up to 300, 400, 500 people. And then, and by then we were doing pretty well. And then that's when Seamus and some other crazy guys who were kind of low-level guys working for the DirectX team came in to see me. And they had this idea to take DirectX and make this DirectX box. They were going to, DirectX is the Windows API for doing gaming. And so they wanted to spread that into the console world through the DirectX box, which was basically just a Windows machine. At first, the original concept was it's a Windows machine, but it doesn't act like it's a Windows machine. It acts like a game console. You put in a disk and it plays a game. You don't know that it's installing it in the background and doing all the gross Windows stuff that a game has to do.
Right.
It just acts nice and easy to the consumer. That was the original pitch. I had been thinking about, boy, you know, I've grown our PC business a lot, and the next place for me to grow the business would really be if I could get in the console business. But I don't really know anything about console business. Sony and Nintendo aren't the friendliest companies to Microsoft. I'm not sure how to make that transition. So here these guys came in, and I pretty early on decided that this was fit with the strategy of where I was trying to go with our group, and that I could make, I could team up with them, and we could try to push this idea of Microsoft getting into the console business. So I was a pretty senior guy at that point, so having me on board really helped. We brought in some other people who were pretty senior. Rick Thompson, who was the head of the hardware group at that time, really spearheaded the early stuff. And one of the first things that we had was that we had a big fight with another group within Microsoft. And so, as often happens with ideas like this at Microsoft, somebody already owns your idea. And so there was a group of people who were ex-3DO people, the 3DO console, doomed 3DO console, who had come to Microsoft, and they had worked as part of the Windows CE team, this embedded version of Windows, to put Windows on the Dreamcast, the Sega Dreamcast. And so the Sega Dreamcast, if you look, actually has a little Windows logo sticker on it, if somebody didn't peel it off. And there was a way to reboot a Dreamcast into a Windows mode, believe it or not.
Wow.
Virtually no one ever did it, and there was almost no reason to do it. But that shipped. Their next thing was to do a console. So we had to have a fight with them to do this console. So they got all their vice presidents together. We got all our vice presidents together. Maybe Rick was a vice president. I wasn't. Certainly none of the Jay and Seamus wouldn't be Seamus never was a vice president. And Jay wouldn't be till after I left. But anyway. Anyway, we got our vice presidents together. They got their vice presidents together, and we battled, and came into a big meeting with Bill and Steve, and Bill chose us, nuked their team, the remnants of their team. Their team explodes in flames. Poor guys are like half dead. We pick up a few remnants. They join our team, and our project goes forward.
What is the difference between the two teams again? One is heading towards a console, the other wants a Windows PC?
That's a good question.
Is that the division?
So their version, their idea of the future is that we're going to build a completely custom console. It's going to have custom operating system, custom hardware. It's going to be like the PlayStation, okay? And it's going to be this custom-built, screaming game machine.
Right.
We're like, so off strategy, so non-Microsoft. We're going to build a machine that's based on the x86 architecture, that uses a graphics accelerator that's already out on the market, that uses standard PC bus, and it's going to run Windows. They're like, you're crazy, it'll never work. We're like, you're crazy, you're off strategy. Big battle, we win.
Okay.
We're more Microsoft than them, so we win. So then we spend the next year figuring out what we're really going to do. And then we come back with a big meeting.
Sorry, what year would this be?
So,
any idea? So
battle, end of '99, kind of. Battle is in '99.
Okay.
Big meeting I'm about to tell you about is in 2000. Okay. February 2000. Famous meeting called the Valentine's Day Massacre. Okay. So we've spent a year basically since this last meeting By then, Rick Thompson has left because he's decided this project's doomed. He doesn't like it. A new guy's come in. My boss for many years, a guy named Robbie Bach. He's the vice president over me. We bring in Jay Allard to do system stuff. Todd Holmdahl to build the hardware. That's the core team.
Okay.
And we add a marketing guy. We had a couple different marketing people over the years, but yeah. But yeah, Jay's doing system software and third party. I'm doing first party games. Todd's doing the hardware. We work for Robbie. Okay. So we all go into this big meeting, February 2000, Valentine's Day Massacre. It's on Valentine's Day, 4 o'clock on Valentine's Day. Board meeting. It's our checkup meeting with Bill and Steve to tell them, a year later, here's the project, here's what we want to build. And we need approval to spend like $1 billion to make this all happen. And because next month is Game Developers Conference, and we're going to announce this officially at Game Developers Conference. And so Bill walks into the meeting. He's got our PowerPoint deck, throws it down the table. He says, "This is an insult to everything I've accomplished at this company." There might have been a few swear words mixed in there. We're all like, we'll step back. The room it's the Microsoft boardroom. So about as serious a room as you can be in. And it's us and all vice presidents around this table. Bill throws it down, and then he just starts yelling at us. And he's mad because it no longer runs Windows, okay? Now the whole reason, one of the whole reasons he picked us a year before was because we ran Windows.
Right.
Well,
what happened?
In the meantime, we decided running Windows was a bad idea and that they were right. And if their plan was here and our plan was here, we've moved somewhere in the middle, okay? Where custom system software, but it's still based on x86 hardware and things like that.
Okay.
So we're reorienting his mind to this new thing, which is a somewhat painful process. So Robbie and I, we know why he's mad, and so we look at Jay, who's in charge of system software, and Jay's just like, words are not coming out of his mouth. He's not normally like this. He's actually normally really good with Bill, but Bill just came in the meeting so aggressively, so I'm like, fine. So I start to argue with Bill about it. Bill, shoots me down. Robbie starts to argue with him about it, shoots Robbie down. Then Jay steps up and argues with him. And it just goes on like that. Then Ballmer jumps in, and Ballmer, when they're both in the room, Bill does all the technical stuff and Ballmer does all the business stuff. So Ballmer's going through our business plan, going, you're going to lose, $1 billion and this and that. And we're like, yeah, it's going to lose $1 billion, that's the plan. And, and anyway, and they're just yelling at it, just taking turns yelling at us for hours. So wow. It's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, it's 7 o'clock, it's 8 o'clock, Valentine's Day. We're all looking at our watches. It's like we have wives and girlfriends, and we're not only are we being yelled at for hours at work, but we're in big trouble back home too, right? Yeah. And so this is just going on and on and on. Up around 8 o'clock, there's a Microsoft vice president, technology guy named Craig Mundy, and Craig has been sending out these sort of paranoid memos for months, maybe even years, about Sony and the threat Sony it represents to the company. And the memos are like, well, look, they just put, this machine in the home has a hard disk, and this other thing that people are buying from Sony has a processor in it. And this thing, if these all got together, it would make a PC that would be a threat to Microsoft. Right. That was roughly the tone of these memos. And so, he waits for his moment between all this yelling, and then he just asks a simple question. He says, what about Sony? And Bill and Steve stop, because they've been reading his memos, and they look at each other, and they say, yeah, what about Sony? What about Sony? I like this plan. I'm gonna give you guys everything you want. I'm gonna let you be separate from the company. I'm gonna let you go off strategy and not do Windows. I'm gonna let you, And then, and then Ballmer jumps in and is like, yeah, you guys can have whatever you want. You can go do this thing. We really want you to do this thing.
That's great.
And 5 more minutes. 5 minutes of, go do it. We love the plan. It's awesome. Go do it. And then we're out of there, 8:05. And I turned to Robbie and said, that was the weirdest meeting I've been in 15 years at Microsoft. And we just shake our head and we walk out of there and we have carte blanche to do the project.
That's great. You realize you're keeping me on the verge of breaking out in laughter all the time, and I'm trying to keep serious. These are great stories, really great. I love hearing them. So you've got a plan to go spend $1 billion and develop this platform. How does the software? What was your role in this plan?
Well, so now my job is to put together a games portfolio. Okay, and the games press is really skeptical that I can do it, that we can do it. Okay. And I faced this when I first was building Microsoft's game business. Microsoft's going to do entertainment, you're an operating system company, you're an office company. And over time on the PC side with the PC press, first of all, I could spend time with them personally, and they learned that I'm actually a gamer, that I have a background making games, that I love games, and we started to put out better games, and that convinced them. But I've got a whole new set of press, a whole new platform to convince, and people are super skeptical. And frankly, I'm a bit skeptical because games take about 3 years to build, and I've got like 1.5 years before launch.
For Xbox.
For a platform we don't have yet.
Right.
To build. So I'm desperately, after I get approval, I'm desperately trying to put deals together.
Did you guys have hardware development systems?
They were PCs.
Oh, okay. And that wasn't like a Power PC?
That was later. Power PC was in 360.
Oh, okay. Right.
So, I have a lot of connections in the game group, and I'm calling on all of them, and I'm trying to figure out what I can do. Early on, I hear Lorne Lanning might be available, who did the Oddworld series, which was a Sony exclusive. And I grab onto that, and the lawyers stay up all night to put this deal together, and so we have our first kind of big deal to make this thing called Munch's Odyssey, which was one of our ship titles. With Lorne Lanning, well-known console developer, buys a lot of credibility for us, press loves him, blah, blah, blah. Discovered this, there was a Sega Dreamcast game called MSR Racing from a group in London called Bizarre Creations. And we grab onto that and turn that into something called Project Gotham Racing, because they already have a racing engine and it's pretty much working. We can just add new tracks and rev up the graphics for the new system. So we've got that going. And just everywhere I'm trying to get these projects together. Then one day my phone rings and it's this guy Peter Tamte. And I had met Peter Tamte at a few game conferences, and he's the head business guy for a little game developer in Chicago called Bungie. And Bungie, I had played some of their early games, and I had a lot of respect for them, but they were small and struggling, and they were going out of business. And his call was to tell me that they were going out of business, and that they were looking to be acquired by somebody. And they had this new thing, this kind of a prototype that they had shown for this thing called Halo, and would I be interested? And I said, yeah, I'm very interested. I have a ton of respect for your team's work, and I need teams. I need content desperately. And so that we started talking. And it was complicated because they had already sold 1/3 of their company to Take-Two. And they were using Take-Two as their publishing partner. And so I had to talk to the head of Take-Two, a guy named Ryan Brandt, and we had to negotiate how we were going to split up acquisition of this company. And I only really wanted the new project Halo, and I wanted all the people. There was a second project called Oni, and I said we would finish Oni for him, and then I would move those people. The core team was in Chicago, and I moved them to Seattle. The Oni team was here in San Francisco, so I said they'll stay in San Francisco, finish Oni for you, and then I'll move them up to join me to finish Halo. And you can have all the back catalog. You can have all the games they made up till now. All I want is Halo and the team. And he agreed to that, and we did a deal, 3-way deal, where he's happy, I'm happy, they're happy. Move them out to Seattle.
Had you seen Halo or any? What made you?
Not
think
when I first had the call.
What made you think it was an interesting?
I didn't know what Halo was. I had played earlier a bunch of games and I liked them. And and that was generally, kinds of people I worked with were people who I had played their games and had respect for.
Right.
But they had the Halo. If you see that first Halo trailer and it's around, it's funny. It's got like the little animals running around, stuff that never made the game. It was because they were a Macintosh developer first, so it was actually a Mac thing. Let me tell a little Mac story. So we do the acquisition, and then one day I'm in my office and I get this mail from Steve Ballmer, which is unusual, and it says, Steve Jobs is mad. You bought some company called Bungie. He's yelling at me about it. Call him and calm him down. And here's his number. I'm like, Steve Jobs. Okay. So I pick up the phone. Call. Steve Jobs answers the phone. But I'm ready for the call. He's mad. I know why he's mad. He's mad because I just bought pretty much the last Mac game developer on the planet. And I tell him, hey, I like the Mac. I worked on multiple versions of Office for the Macintosh. Probably a fib about me liking the Mac, but certainly true. I worked on multiple versions. Worked on the ill-fated MacWord 6, which I didn't mention. But anyway, I would love to see our games on the Mac. I would love to put out a Macintosh version of Halo. But I'd also like to have Mac versions of Age of Empires and other things. If we could set up a company to port our games to the Macintosh, then you could have more than just Halo on the Mac. You could have a bunch of Microsoft games on the Mac. And he was kind of like, yeah, that sounds good. Here, work with this other guy on my team. You can work out the details with him. Okay, well, it wasn't just a random idea I had. See, Peter Tamte, the guy who originally called me about the Bungie acquisition, he was the only one I didn't have a job for, okay? Because when I acquired them, I needed the development team. I didn't need the business guy. And he had told me that he wanted to start this Mac porting company. So I got Apple to pay for it. So I got Apple to fund his new startup. So he got a job and got to create the company he wanted. I got Steve Jobs off my back. And I got a bunch of our content ported to the Mac, which we got paid a royalty for. So it's all good. The only bad part was part of the deal was me and the head of Bungie, a guy named Alex Seropian, had to go to the next Macworld and be on stage with Steve Jobs. Okay, so it's uncomfortable to be a Microsoft guy in front of 10,000 screaming Mac people, I will say that. So we fly into New York the day before the show. And Steve, we're in the cab coming in from the airport in New York, and the phone rings, and it's Steve's handlers, and they say, oh, the rehearsal's really not going well. Because we were supposed to go in and do dress rehearsal. They're like, rehearsal's really not going well. Steve's really unhappy. We'll call you back in a few hours. So Alex and I go, we check in our hotel, have some dinner, phone rings again. They're like, he's still in a bad mood. It's still not going well. Just come in tomorrow. And I'm like, the event's tomorrow. It's like 9 a.m. tomorrow. And they're like, yeah, just come in just before the event. We'll brief you just before the event. I'm like, okay, we're going to be on stage in front of 10,000 people. We have no idea what's going on. Okay, so we show up the next morning, and like 5 minutes before the event, Steve Jobs comes over, shakes my hand, only time I ever met him my whole life, says, I'm going to say this, at some point, you and Alex walk on stage, shake my hand on stage, talk for 30 seconds, say whatever you want, Alex talks for his 30 seconds, then you guys say goodbye, walk off stage. Okay, so that's what we did. So, and we survived. There were no snipers in the audience. No.
Right.
And we got to be on stage with Steve Jobs, and it was fun.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting.
So anyway, Yeah, so we should probably do Xbox launch and stuff like that.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about the launch of the Xbox and the importance of Halo to that launch.
So we were really in a tricky place because we didn't know whether, first of all, we were PC developers. Most of the people we had brought on board were PC developers, Bungie PC developers. And so we didn't really know the console thing. And the console games at that time were very colorful and flowery, and there was Mario hopping around and Sonic the Hedgehog. And so I would get questions from the console press like, what's your Mario? You know, and I couldn't say it's the Master Chief, you know, because he's not colorful and not bright, and you know, it's like, so I'd get these weird questions I couldn't answer. Also, we came from a world of PC gaming, which at that time was really being revolutionized by connected play. So, you know, even the original Age of Empires, a big part about it was being able to play online with other people. Certainly Doom and Quake and things like that had been out. And so first-person shooters were all about playing with other people. We had built the Xbox with a broadband connection right in the box, you know. And so that was a core of our strategy, right? But the console world, people had dabbled with connected play for a long time, but nobody really had made it work. And so they didn't really believe that that could ever work in a console. And when I showed them Halo, in a way, it was their worst fear. It was like, oh, this just proves they don't know console. It's clearly a PC game, a first-person shooter. It's dark. It's violent. This isn't Mario, you know, and this is their one of their flagship titles. They just don't get it. You know, they really don't get it. That was basically the response that I would get. Also, we're developing this. I mean, Halo's in a crash development program because it's basically a program starting from scratch with less than 2 years to be built. Really hard. The team is incredibly talented, but they have a really, really hard job. And the hardware is under development at the same time. E3, so E3 is in June before we launch in November 2001. The best we have is hardware that's running half speed. So they're showing their game on half-speed hardware, and people aren't really feeling it.
No.
Yeah, and so the games press is ragging on us, and they're ragging on Halo in particular. Penny Arcade, you know, the popular online comic, is saying bad things about Halo. There's a famous Penny Arcade comic where they say Halo is shit. Anyway, it goes on and on. And so coming into launch, we're really, you know, second-guessing ourselves. Well, we've got Lorne Lanning and Oddworld. Maybe that'll be our big hit because that's more console. You know, will it be Halo? I don't know. We love Halo. We love to play this game.
Right.
But maybe we're just PC guys and we don't get console.
And Halo was exclusive to Microsoft, right?
Yes, we owned the team. It was always exclusive. So, so we really didn't know coming into launch what was going to happen. Right. And so we got to just do it and see. And how were sales in the first year, or first few months? It definitely exceeded our expectations. And Halo was far and away the game that people loved to play. It really, if we didn't have Halo, I don't know, I think the Xbox would have just failed. It was fundamental to the success of Xbox. And it really helped Xbox redefine what console gaming was. You know, that it could be grittier, that it could be darker, that you know, it could be harder core. Maybe less toy-like. In terms of the less game philosophy. You know, and a lot of that came from Japan. You know, our big competitors were Japanese, both Sony and Nintendo. Right. And there was the console business had been controlled by the Japanese for so long that there was this Japanese philosophy to everything. It's like if we had only seen anime movies for 20 years, you know, and then somebody comes out with Godfather or something. You know what I mean? And people are like, that's not anime. The eyes aren't big.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
So maybe it's not a perfect analogy I'm making. But
so your competitor at this time is the Sony PlayStation?
Sony PlayStation and Nintendo 64.
64.
Or sorry, Nintendo GameCube was there.
GameCube.
And it was PlayStation 2.
And did Sony have...
So Xbox was Xbox, PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube.
And did Sony have its own exclusive titles? Wasn't Grand...
Everybody had their own exclusive
GTA
titles.
is that later?
It was exclusive for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. It had originally come out on Sony, PlayStation 1, I believe, exclusive, and then it was exclusive for a while on Xbox, but we eventually got a version.
So do you have any sort of statistics on how many people, the number of people who bought an Xbox who bought Halo?
I don't know the exact numbers. I mean, it was north of 25%. It was a big number.
Right. Did you ever co-package them? Like if you buy the console, you get a free Halo?
I don't remember. That might have happened later. It'd be a marketing thing. It wasn't really my deal. My deal was to make the games.
And Halo now is still going on. It's still a franchise, right?
Yeah, but it's very complicated history. I mean, I ended up leaving Microsoft about 3 years later. So I left Microsoft in 2004.
Right.
After I left, there was a big fight between the Bungie team and my replacement management. And ultimately, Bungie negotiated a way to leave the company and become independent.
Okay.
They had to do multiple versions of Halo to sort of earn their independence. And now they're completely free of Microsoft, and they're working on a new game called Destiny.
Okay.
For Activision Blizzard. And meanwhile, Halo 4 was done by an internal Microsoft team called 343 Industries, which is run by a couple women, actually, who used to work for me.
Let's see, where are we? God, we've got through many of these. Well, Microsoft Game Studios.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you got put in charge of that and what its growth was like under your.
Oh, didn't we talk about that?
Well,
I mean,
I guess.
Yeah. I mean,
we did a little.
Ultimately, I renamed it Microsoft Game Studios. It started, like I said, as Kids and Games. And
oh, that's right. Okay.
And then we grew it.
And this is the group that grew from 50 to 1,200 people.
Yeah. So by the time we launched Xbox, we were about 1,200 people. After Xbox shipped, I got put in charge of third party. They took third party away from Jay Allard and put it under me. So then all the content was under one person. Okay. And then Jay could focus on the system software stuff. And so then I started dealing with Electronic Arts and Square and other third party developers, as well as running first party.
Okay. And how would you say game development, has it changed since then? Since the early Xbox days to today, or is it?
Yeah, it's changed in a lot of ways. Basically, what happened with console games between then and now is budgets have gone up and up and up and up until they've gotten really astronomically high. Destiny, the rumors for that game are north of $300 million. It could very well be the most expensive game ever made by the time it launches this September.
Is this for Xbox or various?
It'll launch across multiple
platforms.
Yeah, they have 600 people working on it.
Wow.
In office space in Bellevue. So it's at the high end. The games have gotten massive. The teams have gotten massive. The stakes have gotten massive. And what's happened to the publishers is they've gotten more and more and more conservative. They do less and less titles every year because they're more and more expensive. So they're much more likely to do a sequel than to do something original.
Kind of like Hollywood.
It's exactly like Hollywood. Yeah. And so this huge gap has opened up in the market. There's the guys at the high end, and there's nobody in between. And then at the low end, there is mobile and crowdfunded and all this new stuff. Right. And those markets have been incredibly explosive, incredibly exciting,
like
huge.
10-person kind of company, small.
Yeah, and so you go, oh, it's just a 10-person company like Mojang that's made $1 billion with Minecraft, or it's a 100-person company like Supercell who has done Clash of Clans and Heyday and just sold half the company for $1.5 billion. I mean, the little guys are big now, You know, these out of this, you know, the traditional people who owned the console world, these publishers, have kind of gone off on their own little planet, and meanwhile, huge new companies have grown up in the space that they left behind. And so, and that's exciting. Tons of cool stuff happening down there. Yeah. And then what's happening is this crowdfunding. So Kickstarter and direct connection between the customers and the creators is starting to make it so that some game developers can fund, starting to fill into this gap, starting to have $10 million budgets or $20 million budgets for games by pre-selling directly to the fans. Chris Roberts, who we worked with in the old days, is doing a thing called Star Citizen now. His crowdfunding, through crowdfunding, he's raised $43 million as of today. Wow. So that gap is getting filled in from below in a really interesting way. Yeah. And then you have, you know, digital distribution, and you have, you know, mobile, tablet, and then you have free-to-play, and then this whole new free-to-play business model is completely revolutionizing everything. So in a way, I mean, the last few years of the game business have been more exciting and interesting than any time before.
There's a sort of bigger space for more people to get involved.
And for littler teams. You know, which is, to me, is awesome. I mean, it's back to like where a guy in a garage can make a game and have it be interesting and important and fun.
Yeah, I heard an interesting description of why big companies find it hard to innovate, and that's because in a big company, you've got people that are sort of geared up to do certain things, certain competencies, and so on. But there's a lot of, when you take on a new project or go in a new direction, there's a lot of them that aren't really the right fit. If you start a new company, you get exactly the people you want for that job.
Yeah, and you really see that in these big game companies. They become more and more specialized.
Right.
So you don't, in a little game company, you have a programmer and an artist. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Maybe you have a designer if you're lucky. You have a designer, programmer, artist. You know, big companies don't have an artist. They have, you know, 2D texture artists.
An art department.
They have 3D concept artists. You know, they have animators. Animators don't paint. They don't draw. There's character artists. I only do characters. You know,
right.
And so that specialization, which lets them do these huge high-end projects, actually really interferes with them then coming out and doing a small project. Right. Kind of like what you're saying. They become so specialized that they're not what they need to be.
Also, they're really rolling the dice much more strongly that way, because they basically are counting on blockbusters.
Well, that's, yeah.
Every title to be a blockbuster.
It's tough to say which is riskier. I mean, yes, the blockbusters are risky, but there's so little competition at those high levels of budget, you know, that the projects, they have to be successful, and they kind of make them be successful. Otherwise, they're hosed.
They've got the formula down pretty well.
Well, there's so little competition in the sense that gamers want something, anything, and so, you know, all right, I'll take Call of Duty 17, you know, because I need a game to play. There's so few games coming out.
Right.
At the other end of the spectrum, massive competition. Tons and tons, hundreds, thousands of iPhone games coming out every single day. And how do you get someone's attention? How do you get them to see your game, even if it's great? Yeah. How does your game get attention on iPhone or Steam or something like that? And so there it's like this just bubbling mass of just tons of stuff. Most of it's crap. Most of it never sees the light of day. Or, I mean, it comes out in the store, but no one plays it. And so how do you know, that's super risky too. So there isn't really a safe part in the market. It's like,
yeah, interesting.
But you know, that's entertainment. It's like, you know, it's a risky business.
It is. I saw in an interview you did recently with, you were speaking about the Seattle game developer community and how amazing that was. I think you mentioned there were over 150 companies in the Seattle.
About over 300 now.
Oh, 300?
Yeah, you saw an
I guess that was an old interview. How did that happen? And did Microsoft have a role to play in that?
Yeah, so I think that it happened because we just have a long history of the games business in Seattle area. And so, you know, I mean, some of the Seattle was Nintendo's distribution hub for going way, way back, and Nintendo had a software group there that started making games. They created a school called DigiPen that started to churn out talented game developers, game artists. Microsoft was there, Sierra was there in the early days, Electronic Arts had an office there. So there were a bunch of old game companies in that Seattle area. And then you have, pour on top of that, just this tech talent that you have in Seattle. That's a lot of just tech people most programmers would love to work in the game business. I mean, a lot of them would, because it's kind of a sexy thing. And so, yeah, so now I'm going to mute my phone so it doesn't interrupt this again.
That's okay. We're almost done.
So it basically went out of that. And then what happened is guys get together, they form a team. It's successful or it's not successful. They break apart and they form two teams, smaller teams, and then those grow and be successful. And so there's just this critical mass of growing and splitting and starting new teams that's happened there.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an incredible number of companies. Can you tell us, just my second last question, what is Microsoft's relationship, or was it at the time, with EA and with early Xbox?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about acquiring EA potentially at the time. You know, I remember a meeting we had with Bill Gates where, you know, it was brought up, and you know, I was clearly against it because I wanted to build EA. I didn't want to buy EA. If they bought EA, I would have left because they wouldn't need me. They'd have EA.
Right.
EA was my competitor in some sense, especially on the PC side. You know, we were often competing for deals. We were trying to buy Westwood in the early days. Age of Empires had been real successful, and Westwood is the creators of Command & Conquer. Okay. And so if we had Age of Empires and Command & Conquer, we would own the real-time strategy category for PC gaming. And we had been in negotiations for months with Westwood, and I got married and went off on my honeymoon for a week. And while I was on my honeymoon, EA stepped in and stole the deal out from under us. I came back from my honeymoon and found out that that we had lost this deal that I thought was in the bag when I left. So it just gives you a sense, right, of what it was like. But buying EA would have been expensive. I mean, at the time, I think it was about $5 billion, and yeah, I don't know whether it would have been a good idea or not in retrospect.
Because they're getting their support for a platform can make or break your platform, basically, right?
They were the big guys then. I mean, they're not the biggest publisher in any way now, but back then they were. Yeah. And they really threw their weight around. They would not put anything on Xbox Live, for example, until we did some kind of royalty deal to cut them in some money, that kind of thing.
I see. Well, that's it for my questions. Do you have any other things you want to talk about or mention?
I think I told enough stories for now.
Okay.
I mean, the only thing we didn't talk about, you know, I do some retro programming these days, which is really fun.
Oh, yeah. So let's talk about Halo 2600. Yeah. And wrap up with that.
Yeah. So that's probably a good way to end. So you know, I started programming 6502, Atari 800, and I was at a game conference in, I think, Philadelphia, little conference, gave a speech there, and was riding to the airport with some guys, and one of the guys says, hey, you know, you mentioned the 800. There's actually this book about the 2600. The 2600 was the first home game console, came out in 1977, so well before the 800. And he said, it's called Racing the Beam. Maybe you'd be interested in reading it. I'm like, yeah. So I got home, bought the book, checked it out. And it's an amazing book about how the 2600 works. And it's an incredibly nasty machine. And it's because in 1977, they couldn't afford very much. So it's got 128 bytes of memory. Wow. Only. And because it only has 128 bytes of memory, there's no memory map display. So
this video memory or system memory?
Total memory on the machine is 128 bytes. So you're like, well, how can you even have graphics if you only have 128 bytes? Well, the way you have graphics is the program itself has to keep track of where the electron beam is on the screen, and it has to basically turn things on and off while the electron beam is going down, drawing
by
the screen,
yeah.
which is why the book is called Erasing the Beam.
Right.
Your code, which is running on an incredibly slow processor. So, every time you do an instruction, the electron beam's already moved partway across the screen.
Yes.
Meanwhile, you're trying to change things in real time as things are happening on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very challenging to work
yeah.
on. But for an old assembly programmer like me, that's part of the fun. So, so I read the book, and then I started to look into, well, how hard would it be just to make it something simple, kind of a hello world kind of thing. And what I chose for my hello world, for whatever reason, was I drew a little pixel art Master Chief, and I tried to get him to show up on the screen. And and I made that happen, And once I had my little Master Chief up, I was like, oh, well, maybe I can make him move around. And so I hooked him up to the joystick, and I could move him around the screen. And then I'm like, well, maybe I could give him a gun and make him shoot. So I had him shoot. And then I need something to shoot at, so then I made some enemies to shoot and have the enemies shoot back at him. And so I just was kind of screwing around for several months. And I went to GDC, Game Developers Conference, and happened to run into some old school guys I knew, and standing right there with him was a guy named Todd Fry, who did the infamous Pac-Man for the 2600 back in the day.
Oh.
And there was a guy, Mike Micah, who I didn't really know, but who does a bunch of this retro stuff. Mike was in the press recently for doing a Donkey Kong where he replaced the Mario with the princess.
Okay.
Because he has a young daughter. Anyway, the story went viral. But so running into these guys, Chris Charla and Mike Micah.
Oh yeah. I know
Ian
those guys.
Bogost, who was one of the writers of this book. They encouraged me to go forward and make the game. And so I spent the next kind of 4 months, tried to get it done in time for Classic Game Developers Classic Game Expo, which was in Las Vegas in July, I think. Anyway, and that's where I released the finished product, Halo 2600. Okay. And I didn't think anyone would really care. I just did it for fun.
How big is the program?
The program's 4,000 bytes, 4K. Which,
nice.
I refuse to go. There are ways to do bank switching to go above 4K, but I refuse. On a machine that only has 128 bytes, 4K is the size of its address space because it uses a cut down version of the 6502. Mm-hmm. So I think 4K is enough. So so anyway, released it there. It got probably more press than I thought it should. Chris Melisinos was putting together an art show for the Smithsonian American Art Museum on video games, and he included it in the show called The Art of Video Games. And so he included it as an example of homebrew. That's what it's called. The people who do this stuff, homebrew. And anyway, and then I was contacted by the Smithsonian American Art Museum. They said they had decided to start a permanent collection of video games, and they picked it as one of the 2 games to enter their permanent collection. So now it's one of 2 video games in the permanent collection of the Smithsonian American Art Museum.
Oh,
so
that's great.
A little more, ended up getting a little more out of it.
How do you get a copy of that?
There's a website called AtariAge.com, and there's a guy there who makes cartridges basically by hand.
Okay, so he'll burn you a cartridge.
And sometimes he has them in stock, sometimes he doesn't. So yeah. The original ones from Classic Gaming Expo sell for hundreds of dollars online now. They're